Alright, this video is on percents or percentages, okay? And a percent is a ratio that is part of 100. A ratio, percent is a ratio that is part of 100 or out of 100. Okay? And really to kind of, before we really get into percents, I just want to remind you of a couple of things. And yes, I'm coming. And you can, I'm going to fast forward a second. I'm going to take another second. And that is when you have, let's see, we're going to do 25 over 100. Okay? So the first thing that I want to remind you is that the fraction bar, in addition to being a division sign, says out of. Okay? That's one thing to remember. Okay? And the words out of tell me to divide, but when I have the word of all by itself, when I just have of, okay, and I'm talking about percentages, when I have the word of, okay, the word of tells me to multiply. And I'm sorry if it confused you that I wrote out of and then I said, you know, of means to multiply, but I'm not talking about when it says out of. I'm just saying when it says of. Okay? Of means to multiply. Okay? And I'm reminding you of that because when it says things like 25% of, you know, 100, it's saying 25% times 100. Okay? And I think we've talked about this before, but a percentage, you can turn a number from a percent to a decimal, okay, by moving a decimal 2 places. So 25% equals 0.25. So 25% of 100 is the same as saying 0.25 times 100. Okay, so that's just wanted to kind of remind you of that. Okay, so anytime it says percent, like it is, like a sample problem might be, okay, 30% of the 5th grade love going to recess. There are 67 5th graders. How many love going to recess? Love going to recess. And I know, so this is like my example problem. So I know you're like, all the kids love going to recess this morning. I know. But in my problem, only 30%. Okay? So I can look at this 2 different ways. One way is to say, you know, 30% of these 67 fifth graders. So I've got 30% of, I just broke that, these 67 fifth graders. Technical difficulty with my sharpening. Thanks for your patience. 30% of 67 students. I just broke again. I'm going to have to use a different color. Of 67 is the same as saying 30% times 67. And 30%, if I move my decimal 2 places, I get 0.30 times 67. Okay? So my number sentence that I'm going to be using is 67 times 0.30. Okay? 0, drop the 0, there's my place holding 0. 30 times 7, 21, 18, 19, 20. Okay? Read my decimal twice. Okay? So the answer would be 20.1, but I'm not going to have 20.1 children, so about 20 would be my final answer. Okay, about 20 kids love recess. Okay, so that's one way I can solve it, is just using this of trick. The other way I can solve it is as a proportion. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set this up like a proportion, where I'm going to say 30, that's my percent, okay, out of 100. Okay, 30 out of 100, okay, is the same as some number out of 67 kids. Okay, and in this case, I'm putting the part at the top and the whole at the bottom. The 30% is the part of the percent, the whole is 100, and the part of the kids is the number I'm looking for, and the whole grade level is 67. And here's where I do my baseball bat. Okay. And there's the ball. Okay. So I have to do 30 times 67, which PS, and they kind of do that there. 21, 20. Okay. So now I have, let's see, there's no decimal here, so 2010. Okay. And now I have 2010 divided by 100. Okay. 100. Okay. And I'm kind of running out of room, but if I keep it going, it's going to come out to 20.1. Okay, so to me, just doing the 30% of was easier, but you can set up the whole thing as a proportion. Okay, and I feel like we need to look at that just a tiny bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next page, and I'm going to do 4 sample problems where I go ahead and use the proportion. Okay, in my first sample problem, okay, I'm going to tell you that when they give you something percent of something, that's the first kind of problem they'll give you. Okay, and on this one, okay, so like for example, 15% of 500. Okay, so when they do this, you can just multiply. Okay, careful with place holding 0 and then these 2 zeros. Okay. 2 decimal places, 2 decimal places. Okay, and so there's my answer, 75. So when they say something percent of something, you probably just want to do the multiply. Okay, so just multiply. Okay, but don't forget to turn the percent into a decimal. Okay. But sometimes they'll say, what percent of something is something, okay? So they might say, what percent of 500 is 75? Okay? And that's where you may have to use a proportion, okay? So it's what percent, you're missing the P, the percent. Percents are always out of 100. Okay? And here we've got the part on the top and the whole on the bottom. The whole is 500 and the part is 75. Okay? And that's where I do my baseball bat. 75 times 100 is 7,500, and now I'm going to divide by 500. Drop a 0. Each thousand, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times 500. Okay. So what percent of 500 was 75? 15%. Okay? Right. Sometimes they will ask, and yes, I am kind of just doing, okay? They'll say something is some percent of what? Okay, they'll say 75 is 15% of what? Okay, so in this case, okay, saying 75, 15 is your percent. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start off with a part on the top, whole on the bottom. Okay, 75 is the part. Okay, so it's asking me. 75 is 15% of some number that I don't know yet. Okay. So, baseball bat, and baseball. So, 75 times 100 divided by 15. Let's see, 2 15s is 30, so 4 15s would be 60. So 5 15s would be 75. Okay. 0 and 0. So 75 is 15% of 500. Okay. And finally, I'm actually going to do this one right here. I'm going to do this one again as a proportion. Okay. So I'm going to do something percent of something is what? Okay. 15% of 500. Okay. Again, I'm telling you, the easiest way is to just multiply it. Okay. If it says something percent of something, the of means multiply. But let's say you're like, well, but all these others need proportions, so I want to try this. Okay, that's fine. Okay. 15%. The percent is always out of 100. I always have my part on the top, my hole on the bottom. 15% of 500, so 500 is the whole, and this is the number that I'm looking for here. Okay, baseball, and that. Okay, so I've got 500 times 15. Place holding 0, and then 2 more zeros. Again, this should look very similar. It's just we don't have the decimal place in there because I'm about to divide this number by 100. Okay, so I've got 7,500 divided by 100. Okay, so 7 times 100 is 700. Zero, 500, 0. So 75, 15% of 500 is 75. Okay? And I get the same effect as using the percentage as a decimal by dividing by 100. Okay? So the 3 ways that you'll see, these are just example percent problems. Okay, is where it says 15% of 500, or some number of percent of something, is what? Okay, what percent of this number is this other number? And this number is 15% of what other number? So those are, it's really 3 problems, but this one I showed you 2 different ways to work it. Okay.